At this time, the Chair calls up Senate Bill 514, recognizing Senator Rodriguez to explain his bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. Good afternoon. Senate Bill 514 amends the Education Code to add guidelines that ensure robust student press educational opportunities. Mr. Chairman and members, the Hazelwood decision of the U.S. Supreme Court in 1988 created a lack of clarity regarding the First Amendment rights of public high school journalists. As a result, administrators have used Hazelwood to justify censoring information and ideas. Public school students have been blocked from publishing editorials or news articles that would serve a legitimate educational interest. To ensure that Texas students are protected from arbitrary censorship, which is contrary to best practices in education as well as the First Amendment protection for journalism is essential to inform self-governance, Senate Bill 514 creates guardrails to balance administrative oversight with student journalistic expression. Senate Bill 514 clarifies what is considered, quote, protected speech, unquote, as relates to student journalism, and requires written policies that allow students to practice and teachers to teach within those parameters. And Mr. Chairman, I do have a committee substitute.
And Senator Powell sends up committee substitute to Senate Bill 514. You're recognized. Explain the difference.
Yes, sir. The committee substitute for Senate Bill 514 tracks language in the House version by adding definitions to protected speech, defining student media publication and student media publication advisor, providing that a publication's content is not the campus or district position, and stating explicitly that districts are not liable for content other than is already provided by law. Mr. Chairman and members, we have several witnesses here who are willing to answer any questions and provide more detail.
All right. Any questions for the authors? We'll open public testimony. We'll invite Lisa Silvera, Neha Madeira, Amy Kristin Sanders. Y'all would come on up. Are you Lisa? Amy. You want to go ahead and start, Amy? You pull that microphone over there. You would introduce yourself for the record.
My name is Amy Kristin Sanders. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you very much for your time and the opportunity to share some important information about the workings of student press rights statutes like SB 514. My testimony is drawn from more than a decade of experience as an attorney and journalism professor. I've studied and written about freedom of expression for many years and co-author one of the leading law school case books on the First Amendment and the Fourth Estate. I've taught media law at the college level since 2007. The legal protection that's afforded student journalists today under federal law is widely recognized as inadequate for effective teaching of sound journalistic values, practices, and ethics. The Supreme Court's 1988 Hazelwood ruling effectively removed all First Amendment protection for students who practice journalistic media. After nearly 30 years of experience under Hazelwood, every leading authority in the field of journalism education, both educators and professional practitioners alike, agree that the right amount of press freedom in educational institutions cannot be zero. The American Bar Association, the Society of Professional Journalists, the American Society of News Editors, and the National Council of Teachers of English, and many other organizations have called on states like Texas to reform the Hazelwood standard because young people are graduating unprepared to have educated conversations about social and political issues that censorship restrains them from discussing in the high school setting. This growing consensus has fueled a national movement known as New Voices to enact statutes like SB 514 to bring governance of student media back to a sensible middle ground that existed before Hazelwood. More than a dozen states now have laws comparable to SB 514, protecting the ability of students to publish the lawful and non-disruptive editorial content of their choice. The combined experience of these jurisdictions covers more than 180 years, and in those 180 years, no horribles have materialized. There is not a single case available in any of the publicly available database of court records in which a school has been ordered to pay anyone $1 for harmful material published by student journalists, And New Voices laws strengthen, not weaken, the liability protection for schools by clarifying that speech of students is not the speech of the school. New Voices laws do not result in students prolifically suing their schools over censorship. New Voices legislation like SB 514 has been rapidly advancing across the country. 7 states have passed New Voices laws like SB 514 since 2015. In each of these states, the bills have been passing with an overwhelming bipartisan support because of the growing recognition that the digital age journalism in schools and colleges can no longer be governed by 1980s era standards. I'm happy to answer any other questions you might have. Thank you for the time.
Well, thank you. Thank you for being here. Questions? All right, Lisa.
Hi, my name is Lisa Silvera. I'm the Senior Editor-in-Chief of the award-winning National Sample Odyssey Yearbook at Seven Lakes High School in Katy, Texas. I'm testifying in support of SB 514 because I'm a student concerned about the future of my publication as well as others. This year, we were faced with a brand new principal, and as we began our online and print production cycle, we were often turned away and rejected. In the first issue of the newspaper, we published a cover with a staged photo silhouette using dry ice depicting a student vaping. This related to an anti-vaping news story that addressed the recent epidemic present among students. Though the cover was included in our proof book for prior review, after the issue was published and distributed, our principal claimed the cover was never approved even though it was. Another story pulled in February discussed dangerous trends like the choking game, Tide Pods, and the Cinnamon Challenge. The news article only stated the facts of all the negative side effects of these games. Regardless, the article was pulled last minute, administrators stating it was inappropriate for a teenage audience, forcing the staff to quickly write an alternate story. We felt these stories were crucial to the student body as it not only informed students but gave a different perspective. When it comes to censorship, I know the administrators have good intentions. They worried about phone calls from angry parents, the reflection of the school in the community, and the students' opinions. But high school is meant to be a learning environment, meaning we'll be faced with real topics we sometimes never want to face, but what truly matters is how we deal with them. We want to cover these topics not as an act of defiance for our community, but as journalists who want to keep people involved. Our principal's lack of sensitivity to the situation, as well as her disrespect towards our advisor and staff, caused the future of our journalism department to be at risk. My advisor was forced to resign, and we don't know if we will be able to publish our nationally acclaimed publications next year. Student journalism is being sacrificed for the sake of power and security in an environment where creativity and truth should be prospering. Even though I was only recently involved with New Voices, the legislation's efforts to prevent retaliation against advisors like mine and protect student journalists is not only relevant to my current situation, but has the outcome to actually reverse it. Thank you so much for your time. If you have any questions, I'd love to answer them.
Well, thank you. Thank you for being here and making the trip up. Questions, members? All right, is it Neha?
Yes, sir.
If you would introduce yourself for the record.
Dear Senate Education Committee members, my name is Neha Madira, and I'm Editor-in-Chief of Prosper High School's newspaper, Eagle Nation Online. I'm testifying in support of this bill because last year my staff was censored, prior viewed, prior restrained, editorials were banned, and my journalism advisor was fired. We were a new publication, so we didn't know much about student press rights, and we also had a new principal last year, so we wrote most stories to keep students informed, but in October he started censoring us. A senior movie day cancellation, a book being removed from our curriculum, and solutions to our school's failure of a national walkout day were all topics censored for not being positive or uplifting to the school. After each story was removed, something was taken away from us. First, administrators started declining interviews. Then, our principal started practicing prior review and informed our advisors she'd be non-renewed. After our last story was censored, he called my father in for a meeting and banned editorials. At this point, I'd already gotten 6 weeks of legal advice from the Student Press Law Center on behalf of my staff and set up numerous unsuccessful meetings with our principal, so another staff member and I spoke out through the Student Press Law Center on May 23rd of 2018. Our story received an outpour of support nationwide. More than 20 major media outlets picked up our story. So compelling was our fight against censorship that it became the topic of our TED Talk we gave 6 months later. We also used this national platform to spearhead the New Voices movement in Texas as much as possible. I know our staff can no longer be silenced, but censorship debacles like this happen more often than not, and not all student journalists feel so empowered. Instead, they end up self-censoring or dropping their investigative reporting out of fear of retaliation. The protections New Voices provides for us would ensure that things like this never happen again. At the same time, these rights would not make our publications a Pandora's box of what can be said. This free press law has been passed in 14 other states, and not a single one has resulted in anyone suing a school alleging any wrong. This legislation is also not students versus administrators, because it actually protects them from the pressure they face from community members to censor. After all, education is all about teaching students how to use critical thinking skills, and journalism is about putting those skills into practice. When student media publications have new voices to support them in seeking and reporting the truth, they use the very skills our education system is built on. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. All right, thank you very much, Ben. I appreciate you being here today. Chair would now invite Marty Reaper and Nabah Sadiq, Leah Waters, excuse me if I messed up the pronunciation. Naba.
Yes.
Sorry. If you would introduce yourself to the record.
Yes. My name is Naba Sadiq, and I'm currently a student at Texas Tech University. I'm testifying in support of Senate Bill 514 because I know firsthand what it's like to be a student journalist and experience censorship in high school. I worked for Texas Tech student media straight out of high school and found myself completely unprepared in terms of reporting news responsibly as a student journalist. If New Voices had existed 4 years ago when I was in high school, I would have been better prepared when I entered college in regards to good scholastic journalism and reporting on real-world topics that actually mattered. I learned so much in my 1 year of college as a student journalist than I did in all 4 years of high school, despite taking journalism classes and being part of the newspaper staff for 3 years. During my time as editor-in-chief of the Seven Lakes High School newspaper in Katy, Texas, our administration not only rejected multiple articles written by students, but also threatened to get rid of the student publication altogether. They used Hazelwood as a means to censor us and even provided us with a list of pre-approved topics that we could write about. Although I made many attempts to stop the censorship, I was unsuccessful. Years later, and not only do the students at Seven Lakes continue to face extreme censorship, like you just heard, but now my former advisor is losing her job because of it. I know what it feels like to have my voice silenced, which is precisely why I enlisted the help of the Student Press Law Center back in 2015, and why I began to advocate for New Voices Texas in the first place. I sit before you today, 4 years after my own censorship experience, to let you know how vital this bill is for students who want to practice and learn real journalism without being censored. I'm fighting for a right that I wish I had when I was in high school, a right that could have benefited my future in journalism immensely. Nobody fought for my voice back then, which is why I'm here to fight for those student voices today. Thank you so much, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, any questions? Thank you. And Margie.
Hello, my name is Marty Reaper. I'm a resident of McKinney, Texas. I'm a 17-year master educator. I currently teach at journalism at Highland Park High School in Dallas. I represent the Texas Association of Journalism Educators, where I serve as the board president and represent over 300 journalism educators across the state in support of SB 514. Thank you to Senator Rodriguez for his sponsorship and to all committee members for letting us testify today. My experience with censorship has been minor in comparison to others, and I believe it's because of education, communication, and relationships. SB 514 encourages dialogue that educates stakeholders on student press rights with understanding that prior review is a conversation, but just that, a review. Prior restraint is censorship and denial of learning opportunities required by the state TEKS. A strong journalism education teaches students to ask fundamental questions developed through research, interviewing, and networking. Through their intellectual inquiry, students demonstrate leadership and engagement in public service. Scholastic journalists are partners and allies with our faculty. They are conversation starters. When we censor their curiosity, their research, their voices, do we ask ourselves, are we censoring because of a legitimate pedagogical concern? Or are we doing it out of fear? Fear of backlash or having our authority questioned? Instead of fear, a servant leader should welcome student voices, because within their voices is research, insight, and honesty. I'm learning to be a servant leader. It's a hard path to follow, but it's the right path. It's the type of leader our constituents elected. Educational leaders handle responsibilities and dynamics that we just can't understand. So it's difficult to ask them to build relationships with student journalists, to be open to feedback, and to allow them to do what they've been taught. Yes, it can be a burden, easier to sweep away and ignore, but if administrators are open and treat student journalists like the professionals they strive to be, that relationship can be powerful. In return, our schools can be stronger with authentic connections. One principal I had told me my only job was to keep him out of the news. He didn't want to be the example. Administrators want clear rules to follow, not to interpret. I wish we could trust the relationships and communications that we have, but in reality, the precedent of this legislation will be a comfort to all stakeholders. Student press rights operate on a case-by-case basis across the state, and we have examples and stories to share with you from Texarkana to El Paso, from Dallas to Houston. But the one thing we don't have is hard data. We can't give you the numbers because it's not reported. Most teachers like me, we fear for our jobs, and so we're not going to speak out. So self-censorship is the biggest problem. Education in Texas needs this clear language to level the field, give students, schools, and personnel's protections, and establish a solid foundation that supports student press rights. Thank you. If you have any questions.
All right. Thank you for what you do and thank you for being here. Any questions? Leah?
Yes. Hi, I'm Leah Waters. Thank you very much, Senators and Chairman, for hearing this, registering support for this bill. It's one of those things as an educator that you feel like you can actually do something for your students beyond just educating them. You can make them feel empowered, so I'm very grateful that I can be here with one of my students and other students across Texas to do that. I've been teaching for 8 years, not that long. But I've been in love with journalism since I've been 16, so I've been sitting in the same spot that these kids are, and I've never had that opportunity that they have today to support this. The reason why this bill is so important is because it allows students to feel like what they're doing matters and is important, and what they're doing is they're reporting responsibly issues going on at their school that people need to know about. And when people in power, through Hazelwood, decide that the stories should not be reported, even though they're reported responsibly and are truth, it sets a dangerous precedent and sends a tragic message that not only do their voices not matter, but the truth doesn't matter, and informing the public doesn't either. And that breaks my heart, honestly, as an educator, as a supporter of the First Amendment, as an American. It really does. And I really sit here, I was told probably not to give an emotional plea, but I do it anyways, just because I feel very strongly that this issue doesn't divide administrators and school board and put us on one side and them on the other. It actually unifies us. It allows us, like Margie said, to have a conversation, and it allows for very clear legal guides when things come up. It allows for, well, if this situation comes up, let's just turn to this very clear legal guide. This will protect not only the student voices and advisors like us, but also the school board and administrators who are trying to navigate this very murky world we're in today, and the stories that these students want to cover. So this is why SB 514 is just critical for achieving this, and I really hope that the committee considers this testimony and takes it seriously. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for what you do as well. Appreciate you being here. Thank you, panel. I'm sorry, Senator Tam, we have a question?
Well, yes, so the last person who talked might as well, or somebody else could answer. Where is a line drawn? You know, I think it's very difficult for a superintendent or principal or whoever, the chancellor or whatever, to try to make a decision. You know, they're responsible for whether or not, you know, the overall look of their campus, and if they do want a very positive view, and if they don't, you know, they're responsible for however they want to have their campus viewed, if you will. Where is there a line drawn between the definition of free speech, a line drawn in journalism, which I've heard everybody say, opinion versus fact? Reporting the facts are one thing. Reporting opinion is just that, opinion, and sometimes opinions are disguised as fact. But I don't see where there's protection there for for the readers to know that they're not just hearing propaganda, opinion, you know, and responsible journalism comes with, I mean, the definition of responsible, to just report the facts. But so many times we do see that it's a lot of opinion disguised as facts. Where is that? How do you draw that line?
Do you want me to answer this?
Both you can, if it's
Yeah, of course. So in Journalism 101, we teach very clearly the distinction between fact and opinion, right?
Okay, and that's a good answer. So let me ask this.
Sure.
How does that get enforced?
So we labeled it very clearly that when things are published, there are fact stories and there are opinion stories.
So that's in your teaching.
Correct.
So but what about in playing out? So those that are writing, doing the journal, you know, putting out the publication for the school, for the campus, how is that enforced if the superintendent doesn't do it? And so there's the media advisor. I'm probably calling it the wrong thing.
No,
the
that's
student
correct.
media publication advisor. They look over it. I mean, so they're the only oversight. Is that correct?
The only oversight is the media advisor? Is that what you'd say?
Is that correct?
Not currently. Not
No,
necessarily.
with this bill.
No. Well, do you mean as in like the
a
last
principal
person who might see this?
Who's
Correct.
the one that has the final say-so of the publication?
Well, it goes back into what the TEKS education calls for, that there is a distinction in the lessons they're learning between the styles of news writing and editorial. And so we all follow the Society of Professional Journalists code, but that's where it's seek the truth.
Okay, I think I may not be asking my question clearly.
Can I re-clarify that?
Y'all are talking about the teaching, how it's taught, the
Mhm.
text, what's expected of the students.
Well,
But I'm talking about the final product once they're outside your class.
Mhm. So I will say this just on behalf of mine. Nothing that goes out to print is something I don't see, right? So we review as advisors, as people who can discern between fact and opinion. We make sure that they're writing to those standards. As readers, I think your point was like, how are readers supposed to know what they're reading? That's on a school website. How do they know if that's fact or opinion, right? If it sounds like an opinion and it has a school logo on it, how are we supposed to know? Is that what your question?
Well, I'm just wondering, I don't see how a fine line, or it may be a fine line, I'd like to, you know, we're basically taking away oversight, saying for free speech, we want to lose some of that oversight, and I want us to be careful what we're asking for here, because my concern is we've got taxpayer dollars going to fund our schools, and we want to make sure that we're not putting out in print a lot of opinion or propaganda, and we're taking away some oversight there under the.
I would say,
with them.
okay.
Go ahead.
I will say there is a distinction, a very clear one between propaganda and fact-based opinion pieces, which is what we require. That is something in our teaching. We do that. The fine print, you're concerned with how can we trust advisors to make sure they're not printing things that people could consider propaganda. Is that what your
I
question?
just want to make sure that when we say we're reporting facts, that's what we're doing. Senator Rupp.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I think what you're getting at, Senator, is the question of who is the ultimate arbitrator that draws the line, and whether or not that line has been crossed. And the answer lies in the bill itself. If you look at subsection I, it says on page 4, it says that a school administrator shall interpret the policy adopted and determine whether a student media publication includes speech that is not protected. So I think, is that not what you're asking? Who's going to determine?
Right, because what I've heard is testimony that, superintendent, or we get a new principal in, and the next thing you know, someone's fired.
Well,
So I'm trying to
ultimately,
see
there's
who
a
the
dispute.
ultimate-
I think the bill says it's a superintendent.
So the superintendent.
School administrator could be.
So they can come back and say, this is not.
Could prior review and have a conversation about topics that may or may not be opinion-based, they may be fact-based. I think we teach opinion writing and how to craft opinions, and
I don't think it's I don't have a question about how it's taught.
Okay.
I have a question how it's played out. But
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, that's all.
Thank you. Any other questions? Can answer?
That's my job.
Yay.
I'm not censoring. Senator Hall.
Yeah, I think Senator Campbell's line of questioning is very important here because in the real world, the thing of freewheeling journalism just almost doesn't exist. I mean, I've talked with newspaper publishers. I've got one in my district that they call it censoring, but they will not let a story run that is anything other than a powder puff. The community is wonderful and everybody loves each other and everything's great that's happening. They allow nothing controversial in the newspaper. That's just the way they run it. You have others that there are editorial boards and there are reviews. I would say other than those who run their own website and have their own blog is about the only place that true independent journalism really exists. Everybody has to answer to someone, and that there is some oversight that says this is the bounds within which we're going to operate here. And I'm not sure I quite see that in here because you referred. I think I don't. You said you had a committee substitute.
Yes.
Okay, I don't have that, so I can't quite refer to match up with what you
Is
said.
that hand this out? I think they just handed it out.
No, I don't have it. Anyway, but my point is that in whatever is done here, that I don't think we should ever get away from again. And Senator Campbell's right. This is not a free market newspaper. This is a government publication. It's owned and operated, paid for by taxpayer dollars, and that puts the publication itself in a different category. That it is a government publication, and so there has to be, whatever we do, make sure that there are bounds on what is being done, and it's not just freewheeling.
So something just really fast. So you were saying that this is government funded. So there are First Amendment rights that are protected, right? The fact we were censored from covering a story of a peaceful protest on campus. They were exercising that First Amendment right on campus. We could not exercise our First Amendment right to a free press. That inequality caused by Hazelwood, we're trying to restore that standard. We are operating at a level that is below every other person who is exercising their First Amendment rights. There are religious groups on campus who are exercising their First Amendment rights. We are not able to do that. The freewheeling idea is actually a wide misconception. I drill my kids. If it is not perfect, if everything in there, if anything could be questioned, it's not running. We do our job very well because we understand it comes back on us. It comes back on the school. It comes back on my administrator. We weigh that very carefully before certain things print. So that dynamic, we get that very clear, and even more so because our jobs are at stake now.
And I absolutely believe that you do that. I think you probably do an excellent job at it. But you have to remember that what we set up here is a framework that goes out to the entire state without any recognition of the individuals of the quality that you are and the commitment you have to doing it. This is the framework that anybody can operate in. So we have to be very careful about what we do with that. But I thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you very much, Senator.
All right. Thank you, Pam.
Thank you very much.
And next up, we have Sydney Brown and Wesley Lewis. And Sydney, if you'll start us off.
Good afternoon, Senators and Chairman. My name is Sydney Brown, and I'm a student journalist at Heritage High School in Frisco. Leah Waters, who you just saw, is my current advisor. My dad tells me that if you don't know there's a problem, there's no way you can fix it. That's why I'm here today, to try and be a part of a solution to a problem that I know exists in our community. Freedom of the press seems to be one of the most forgotten promises to our country, to the citizens of our country, and that goes for high school journalists most of all. Why is it that we are more concerned with journalists writing and reporting the good news that uplifts and less focused on making sure the bad news doesn't happen to begin with. Real news stories have very real implications, and student journalists should be allowed to explore all facts and truths that not only affect them, but deserve to be heard by everyone. New Voices would give them that learning opportunity, to teach students the importance of the truth and how to express it to the public properly, to help them decide if a career in journalism is really right for them. Why should student journalists be deprived of that chance? After all, the principal doesn't have the power to call plays on the field during a football game. The coach does. The principal can't choose the songs the choir sings for a concert. The choir director does. The same goes for theater, productions, dance teams, orchestra, band, etc., etc. If that's the case, then why does the principal have power over the journalism department? Why doesn't that same trust in the advisor to teach responsible reporting, fact-checking, and storytelling, and ultimately do the job they are hired for? New Voices would protect our advisors and prevent them from having to make that difficult choice between their students or their jobs. New Voices has already been passed in 14 other states. New Voices is not a partisan issue. It's a First Amendment one. So now you all know of this growing problem, a problem that threatens the very foundation we are built upon, a problem that goes beyond me and everyone here in support of this bill today. Now that you are aware, it would be hard for us to understand why you would still decide not to pass this legislation and fix it. Thank you. I can take any questions.
I think I would have to argue one point. I
Okay.
think the principal probably would have some say what the choir's saying and what the musical was that was presented at school. I think the principal would have, in the dance team, if there was some things going on, I think the principal would have some say in those things. So I would just disagree on that one point.
Okay.
Senator Powell.
Sydney, for the second time during the testimony this afternoon, I've heard the testimony that there are 14 other states that have enacted this law. Do you know what those 14 states are, or what any of them are?
I do know some of them. Virginia, Colorado, California, pretty sure Utah. I don't know all 14. I don't have a list for you.
That's all right. And in the implementation of these laws in those states, are you aware of whether or not there have been any issues or problems associated with the implementation?
So no. So this bill is like there's no issues in those states because, like they said before, it's about like creating just a very clear line of what to do and what not to do. So it's actually made it easier in those states to be able to. So it's benefited them. It's far outweighs the problems. So no, I don't know of any issues. No.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, Mr. Lewis.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members. My name is Wes Lewis. I'm a First Amendment attorney testifying on behalf of the Freedom of Information Foundation of Texas, testifying here in strong support of SB 514. As you've heard, the Supreme Court has held that students don't shed their constitutional rights to freedom of speech or expression at the schoolhouse gates. Under the traditional Tinker standard, schools have to establish that conduct would materially and substantially interfere with classroom activities in order to censor expressive conduct. So what is clear is that students do have First Amendment rights in the educational context. Unfortunately, however, after the Supreme Court's decision in Hazelwood, those same students do shed First Amendment rights when they enter the journalism classroom. That's arguably where these rights are most needed, yet ironically where they're the least often protected. Under this Hazelwood standard, any curricular student media can be censored as long as the school can come up with a justification for censorship that is reasonably related to a legitimate pedagogical concern. This standard is both much lower and much more ambiguous. This level of censorship impedes educators' abilities to adequately teach students about journalistic values and practices, and it prevents students from taking ownership and responsibility over their own voices. It also allows for faculty censorship or retaliation for views with which they disagree. So in response to this imbalance, 14 states have passed so-called New Voices statutes, which you've heard about today. These statutes are designed to strike a middle ground when it comes to ensuring that student journalists enjoy reasonable press freedoms. These bills, to answer Senator Powell's question, have also have been enacted in a wide variety of states, including Kansas. I think North Dakota was the first. You've heard California, Vermont. I don't have a complete list, but all across the board, and they've often enjoyed overwhelming bipartisan support. At their core, these bills ensure that student journalists can determine the content of their newspaper and prohibits faculty censorship or retaliation for the views that they express. I'd like to stress that these statutes are also fairly limited, both in scope of who they apply to and to the extent that they expand freedom. These bills do not advocate for speech that falls outside the scope of the law, so defamation, threats, incitements, violations that would be otherwise disruptive would be still subject to administrator review. All this does is restore student journalists to the level of freedom and autonomy that this Tinker standard applied. Non-journalist students already enjoy this level of freedom in schools, and SB 514 would only establish parity between the protection that a student has to express his or her opinion on a t-shirt as opposed to in the journalism classroom. So, thank you.
Well, thank you.
Happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Thank you, panel. Appreciate you being here. Is there anyone else wishing to testify on or against Senate Bill 514? Chair hears none. Public testimony is closed. We'll leave Senate Bill 514 pending subject to call the chair. Thank you, Senator Rodriguez.